Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix Leadership Launchpads podcast. And today we have probably the most, I think that's the right word, serendipitous guest ever. So Richard Gerver is here, and we met once, and that tells you something about Richard's impact, I think, on people. Because within that one moment of meeting in a corridor at a conference, I was like, I need to get this guy on the podcast. And we've just been, this was supposed to start this podcast 20 minutes ago. we literally have just been chatting and vibing and all that ever since. So, yeah, I can't wait for you to hear his story and to learn a bit more about him. So, welcome to Richard. I guess, first of all, tell us a bit about what you do.
Well, first of all, serendipity, isn't that a song from Mary Poppins?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm joking. What do I do? God, that is the hardest. I find this, of all the questions you may throw at me and we may discuss, say that is the hardest one, right? Because basically the most simple answer I can give is I spend my life now just shooting my mouth off, either on paper writing or at conferences, events and stuff like that. I suppose in short, I've had two careers. My first career, which was for nearly 2 decades, was supposed to be my one and only career. And that was as a teacher. I started my life as a primary school teacher. I then became a head teacher. And my life turned round during that phase, not deliberately, but I took over, or I became the head of a primary school back at the turn of the millennium that the then government, had considered was so bad. They had it on the time, they had something called the Phoenix List. And the Phoenix List, I know, it was typical New Labour, great name, no substance, right? Anyway, it was called the Phoenix List. And the Phoenix List was basically schools that had been habitually hard to shift for many, many years would end up on this list. And eventually, a bit like, being on death row, you would eventually be the school at the top of the list. And when you were at the school at the top of the list, they would basically shut you down, fire everybody, the staff, the governors, shut the whole thing down. They would, because again, they thought by magic this would happen, they would rename the school, give the kids a new uniform, hire a new staff, new governing body, maybe give it a new motto, maybe in Latin, who knows?
3 words.
And then, bang, everything would be all right. Anyway, I became serendipity. I got the headship, wasn't even looking for a headship. I actually was trying to convince the school to get involved in a project with me on remotivating demotivated boys in reading and writing. Fell in love, applied for the job, got the job, quite young. Thought I was, like a lot of people who end up getting a promotion and just the joy and the ego, it all was running, until I found out I was the only candidate. And I was the only candidate, genuinely. I was the only candidate because I was the only person that didn't know in our local authority area this school was on the Phoenix List. Okay. Anyway, suffice to say, it was a stunning community, which is why I think I'd fallen in love with them as a community. They did remarkable things, and within 18 months, they'd not just turned the school round, but they'd won one of the UNESCO World Education Awards.
Wow.
That kind of changed my life. Again, by accident. I didn't want to be anything other than, I thought that was my job till retirement. I loved it. It was the pinnacle of everything I could ever have dreamt about. But what happened was people then start wanting to know your secret, right? And this is before social media, before the advent of digital technology. And so I was being asked more and more and more to go out and share our story, talk to people about what we're doing. I was approached by publishers. And it got to a point 7 years in where my wife basically said to me, Richard, this is unsustainable. You cannot do both jobs.
Oh, no.
You're traveling, you're running a school. When you're not traveling, you're giving up your weekends to try and do the job you're paid to do, blah, blah, blah. Just so people know, by the way, all the money I made, if I made any money as a speaker in those days, went to the school's budget, not to me, which was great. But she was right. And then my mentor, who many of our listeners may know, some may have mixed feelings about him, I happen not to, was a guy called Sir Ken Robinson, who I met early on in that journey. He and my wife eventually said, you need to leave the school and you need to share your story in a broader, wider context. So began the second 2 decades of my career, which I'm kind of 18 years into now. And that is doing that, sharing my passion, my story for leadership, for people, for human development, for change. And increasingly over that 2 decades, I've had the incredible privilege of working in all kinds of contexts way beyond education, which all the time, I think for me, I'm a harvester. So I kind of harvest these stories and this stuff and then just think, oh my God, that would be so interesting to let these people know about what's happening over here. So yeah, in short, that's what I do.
Wow, that's amazing. And before you came on, I thought I had some goals of like, I want to talk at a big conference and also this sort of thing. And then you've raised them even higher. And we won't pause on it because I'm already getting twitchy that you're going to a conference to present next to Brene Brown and Adam Grant, which is unbelievable. And
tell me about it. You have no idea how terrified I am, Chris. Because
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure other people. I'm sure you have this, and loads of people listening in will have this. Particularly, those people that are listening in who are leaders. I think one of the things that fires and drives most leaders is the absolute imposter syndrome thing.
Exactly
right?
that.
And all my career, whether it was when I was working in school or now, I have always lived on the belief that is today the day people go, seriously, is that all you've got?
They're going to find you out, yeah.
Yeah, and I am now convinced that sharing a stage with Brené Brown and Adam Grant will be the day people go, who the heck is this guy?
Well, at least you haven't got an accent like mine. They'd be like, where the f is this guy come from?
Oh, no, they'd love your accent because at least it's interesting, mate.
All right. Right, let's crack on with the bits then. So for those that are new to the podcast, we run through a series of different kind of, activities and kind of, questions and things like that to structure it. And the first thing we do is we do these things called fast friends questions. And they're sort of designed to create connection and empathy and sort of shared experience. And Richard got to choose them ahead of time. And the first one he chose was, for what in life do you feel most grateful? So
okay, this is going to be deep and a bit weird. The difficult home I grew up in, right? So on the surface, I grew up in, and that's a weird thing to say, I grew up in some ways a very privileged background, right? I came from a very upwardly mobile, middle-class Jewish family in northwest London. They sacrificed a huge amount to send me to a private school. I didn't want for anything. I've spent my entire teaching career, spent it in areas of social challenge. So I kind of, you learn how lucky you were in hindsight. But my parents' marriage was an absolute disaster. And this is in an age in the 1970s when divorce was still a kind of taboo. Right. So they tried desperately hard to cling on to something where, in essence, they hated one another. They were almost in an arranged marriage way, way, way too young. My mother was 19. My father was 21. It's crazy. And often the butt of that anger, particularly from my dad, was me. And so I witnessed what sadly many, many thousands of children go through now, which was a really turbulent young childhood. And I think on a number of levels that now I look back on it and have, I suppose, come to terms with it over my life as casting it as a gift. Right. Because first of all, I think when I started my teaching career, it gave me a level of empathy for many of the young people in my care that I would never have had I just been raised as an affluent middle-class kid from a really nice, settled home life. But more importantly than that, I often talk to people about, the challenges and stresses we have in our lives. And I think at a very young age, having to live through really challenging times, gives you a context with which you can pitch other stuff later on in life.
Yeah.
So some of the stuff that sometimes we get het up about in the daily to and fro of our lives, I think I've always been able to just compartmentalize. And so looking back on it now, I think that gift of challenge and struggle as a young person, I'm not advocating it for everyone, right? But I think when I look back now, I realize in some ways that was a remarkable gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to get deep right at the start.
No, I think that's, and it's such a, I would imagine so many people resonate with that. And it's such a weird paradox, isn't it? That I think about this with my own children, in that, like, they've just gone to secondary school. And of course, the standard thing is, I hope you don't get bullied, and I hope all this. And I think back to when I was at school, and, there was a level of whatever challenge or discomfort that again has led to some sort of resilience. And in the confidence book, I at the end of it was brave enough to say, potentially there are 3 types of confidence that sit as a foundation for all others, one of them being coping confidence. And that ability to be confident to cope with stuff. And I suppose that gets developed through tough times. And you get to a point where, we had some weird stuff happen at home, like with accidents and, but we've got through it, and we feel resilient as a family. And potentially that has prepared us well for dealing with things in the future. It's a strange situation.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? I think it's really pertinent and it's really important, because I think generationally, it's funny, before we started recording, you were talking a bit about one of your family holidays and the kids going off and just getting mucky, right? And playing with the mud and all that kind of stuff. And I do think there's something about the kind of homogenized life that so many of our young people experience now, if they're in, a family where they can, versus those kids that don't. And the instinct of all parents to love and protect, which is profound and has always been the case and will always be the case. But I think you're right. I think one of the things that's really important is we're in danger if we overprotect children from mistake making, from failure, from having moments of challenge. Then we're actually not setting them up for the complexities and ups and downs of life. I have an analogy which I use quite a lot, which I wasn't going to share, but hell, I'll do it anyway. If you imagine kids, if you think of a classroom, right, and you think that learning, the one thing we all know about learning is that it's really, really tough, right? Yeah. Really tough. It has to be. Because you get nothing, you learn nothing new by getting something right. You only ever learn something new. Point of mistake, realization you don't know something, you can't do something. So that requires resilience, because you have to be, it's a bit like, you go to the gym obsessively, in my opinion, Chris, but you go to the gym. But one of the things about going to the gym is the whole point of lifting weights, for example, is to break down your muscle, because if you break down your muscle, it grows back stronger, right? Yeah. And so imagine you're in the classroom, kids come in every day, depending on the lesson, depending on their mood, depending on what kind of morning they may have experienced at home or the night before. And they walk in, and every day they walk in with a different number of poker chips, because you as an educator are running a casino. And by the way, the analogy works not just in classrooms with children, it runs with leadership and leaders and their colleagues too, right? So they walk in, depending on all those factors. One kid might walk in a high roller that day, right? Bag full of poker chips of self-esteem, feeling great today, really up for it, feeling positive, life's great, fabulous, right? So I'm gonna engage with you, and I'm gonna chuck my poker chips all over the table when you spin the wheel and roll the ball. Yeah. And I'm in. And then there are other kids that walk in some days clutching one poker chip. And their reflex, and we all know it, right? Whether it's bad behavior, whether it's trying to be invisible, whatever else, or all the behaviors in between, right? Those kids are clutching that chip, and we misconstrue. And I do think it's the same with a lot of our colleagues, right? Yeah. That sometimes we misconstrue evasive or bad behavior as they don't care, they're anti, whatever. I think a lot of the time they're carrying one poker chip, and they're thinking, the game looks great, but if I put it on red and it comes up black, I've got nothing left.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
just going to play any game I
yeah.
can to
Safe,
avoid
yeah.
playing the game. Now, for me, one of the things we need to be better at, and I see it a lot in the work I do in elite sport, is really interesting in elite sport. Some of the most naturally gifted athletes never make it to the highest level because they're so
Yeah.
used to winning, they've never lost.
Of
And they
course.
finally get to a level where they're competing against other youngsters who are as good, if not better than them. And because they've never overcome adversity, they don't know how to cope, and they turn around and they walk away, right?
Yeah.
And so actually there is definitely something in this for me about the gift of, and we have to do it with love, care, attention,
Sure.
but the gift of allowing children to fail, to struggle, to find things hard,
Yeah.
to make mistakes, to screw up is so hugely important. And that's why I look back on those days now and think the gift wasn't just that, of course. It was the love my mother and then later my stepfather showed me in helping me to feel safe and protected and be in an environment where I could learn from that life experience.
Love it. I literally just scribbling down like new launchpad ideas, the gift of failure, and wait for it, classroom casinos.
Oh, I love it. I love
Don't
it.
steal that. All right then. Brilliant. Well, let's keep cracking on then. So, one of the other things that we want to talk about is some ignition points. So things that are events or people that have happened to you, and we've already talked about some, I suppose, that have transformed you. And the one you chose to begin with was this one, which is phrased, reconnecting with a child from my first class after nearly 2 decades. Tell us about that.
Unbelievable. So there I was, young teacher, the beginning of the 1990s. And I remember my first class. It's funny, isn't it? The further away we get from our first class, the more rose-tinted our memory of that first class. Oh, they were angels. They were wonderful. They were probably the same little shits that we have to deal with. But Anyway, in that class, I remember very clearly there was a kid. And in those days, you need to remember 1990, 1991. We were not, very wrongly, we were not as aware or switched on or our understanding of special educational needs as much as we are today, right? So it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we now hear this thing about the massive rise in autism. Well, one of the questions I'd ask is it, or are we just better at identifying it, right? Sure. But anyway, so I remember being told by the teacher that had had this kid the year before, because of course, as a primary teacher, I taught everything, had my class, right? Was told this lad, Gary, was a lovely boy, but he really wasn't capable of doing very much academically. So, just set my expectation. Anyway, within the first week of him being in my class, and I need to cut this story right down because it's quite a long convoluted. I realised he was the most remarkable human being I'd ever met in my life at that point, and probably since, actually, because we had a charity week the first week of our school year. It was a great idea by the head, even in those days, innovative thinking. Rather than making the kids knuckle down on day one straight into the academics, use the first week to rebind your community because they've been fragmented, right? For 6 weeks, there's new kids starting, new staff starting, kids have left. Reconstitute your community. So rather than do the charity week halfway through the year, do it in week one. That way, everybody binds, finds the sense of common purpose, value, settles in, starts to feel, back in the rhythm. And so he did that. Anyway, we had this charity come in, talk to the kids, and they were raising money to build an orphanage in Romania, because at the time there was the scandal about Ceausescu's government's treatment of orphans. It was really moving assembly. Anyway, then through the week, we were going to raise money. On the Friday, have a non-uniform day. And then on the Friday afternoon, the couple running the charity were going to come back. We'd present them with some money. That'd be it. So on the Friday, we get to non-uniform day, and I'm taking register in my class. And I had a little tin on my desk. God, I thought I was clever in those days. Right, because I thought don't want to ruin my rhythm of doing the register, because I don't want to be the new teacher where everyone's judging me for being late into assembly with my class. Oh God, we've got a right teacher here. Right? So I thought, tin on my desk, just do the usual registration and then wait for a clink. And I know kids put money in the tin. Nice. Right? Brilliant. Genius. I know. genius. I haven't got to where I've got today working with Brené Brown because I didn't understand how to use a tin, mate. Anyway, so clink, 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 clink. Get to Gary's name, no clink. Look up, there's a thud on my desk. And I look up, he's put his whole money box on my table.
What?
Yeah. And now we're in an area of social challenge. He is 9 years old. He has got profoundly complex needs, which now we would understand much better than we did in those days.
Yeah.
And I looked at him, I said, you can't, because it was weighed a ton. He was about to crack off, right? You could tell. And I thought, I can't have this discussion with you now. I'll take you all into assembly. I'll phone mum.
Yeah.
Mum phoned mum. She expecting the call. And she explained to me, she said, you have to take the money. Trust me, we've talked about it all week. And last night, Mr. Gerver, Gary turned round to me. He said, Mum, please don't. Oh, so she'd raised single mum with two kids. And she'd said, I've raised my kids to believe that if they want something in life, they have to earn it. Right. She said, so Gary had been saving money, birthday, Christmas, odd jobs around the neighbourhood, leaf picking, washing cars, all the rest of it. And he'd grown out of his bicycle, so he was saving money to buy a new bicycle.
Right.
And on the Thursday night, he said to me, Mr. Gerver, he said, Mum, please don't make me buy that bicycle. I would never enjoy riding it knowing where the money could have gone.
Oh, God.
I know. So even then, he was spectacular to me, profound. The curse, of course, is your kids finally leave the school, particularly at primary age. They leave at 11. They tell you they love you. They'll come back. They never do because you're just not cool anymore. No. So 20 years later or so, I wrote my first book and it was published. And in that book, I had the vignette about Gary because that was my passion for all children everywhere, no matter what their academic ability. And my wife, who was then a head teacher, was at a meeting and one of the other heads came up to her and said, I've just read your husband's book, to which Lynn went, thank God somebody had.
Yeah, there's one.
She said, there's a little paragraph in there about a boy called Gary. And she said to my wife, is it true? And my wife went, yeah, absolutely. It really is. And this fellow head said, that's amazing because I think I know Gary now. I think he goes to my church.
Really?
Would you mind if I reconnected them? Because I think Gary would love it if it is.
Yeah.
And my wife went, of course. So we met over a coffee and I asked him all the questions we'd ask, like what happened next. He said, well, I left at 16. He said, it won't surprise you to know I really struggled. He said, but I did work placement when I was 14, 15 in a local leisure centre and it made me realise what I wanted to do in my life. He said, so when I left school, I applied to the local college who had a leisure management course. I said, what? He said, I didn't get on. So they wrote me a nice rejection letter saying, you sound like a lovely young man, but we don't think you'll cope with the academic rigour of the course.
Right.
He said, so I learned. He said, and then I found we're in Derby and Loughborough's not too far away. He said Loughborough College, not the university, Loughborough College had a really good leisure management course. He said, but I learnt from my mistake applying to the local college. He said, so I made my mum drive me down one Monday morning with my application form because I wanted them to meet me.
Yeah.
And he said they turned me away. So I went back on the Tuesday. They turned me away. Wednesday turned me away. Thursday turned me away. This is a true story. He said Friday I went back. They were so sick and tired of me. They went, here's the admissions tutor. Anyway, he talked himself onto the course, qualified the course. I said, what happened next? He said, then I had one more qualification I needed to get to start what I wanted to start. I said, well, what? He said, that ran on Saturdays for a year in London. He said, so during the week, I earned the money to pay for my train fare and my course fee. This is an 18-year-old kid with profound needs, right? I went down to London, did my course, finished my course. I said, what happened then? He said, I started the business I run today. I said, what is that? He said, well, when I was 14 at the leisure centre, I realised that nobody had a provision for health and fitness for people with physical and mental disability.
Sure.
He said, so I started a little enterprise. That's what I do now. I'm like, and then I said to him, what about your spare time? And he said, I don't really have any spare time. He said, but I do shut the business in December because nobody wants to get fit in December. He said, but through my church, I've built a relationship with a community in West Africa. He
Right.
said, so in December, I use the profits I've made during the year and I go out and spend December in West Africa in this community. So now I'm like crying, right?
Yeah.
And
What a person.
so I'll never forget this bit. I did say to him, I've always had an ego, Chris. People may have realised that if they've come across me before. And the whole way through this extraordinary story, I'm thinking, this is all because of me as a teacher.
Yeah.
And I said, anyway, he didn't say me as the most influential, but he did say his teaching assistant, Mrs. Smith, who he'd had right the way from reception through to year 8 or 9, I think. He said, and she used to have a mantra because he used to get really het up. One of his complex needs was he was very severely dyspraxic.
Right.
So he said, I used to get really frustrated with myself. And she used to whisper in my ear, Gary, the only person that can be responsible for you is you. But if you take that responsibility, there's an army of people that will help you. He said, and I've lived my life through that mantra. Okay. So when we go back to your short question and my ridiculously long-winded answer.
It's a great answer, though.
Gary.
Gary is, wow. I feel like I need to get Gary on the podcast. He would be interesting, wouldn't he? That's
unbelievable.
Such a great story. And again, it's such a useful reminder for leaders or for teachers and all that sort of stuff, teaching assistants. When it's really crappy in school, never to forget that you genuinely could be changing someone's life.
Yeah.
It's frightening, isn't it? I was just thinking about, you made me laugh about thinking it was to do with you. My go-to at the moment is that I was Ellis Genge's PE teacher. And everything to do with him is because of me.
Yeah, obviously.
I think I've taught him maybe once or twice, but everything. I tell my son that all the time. So there we go. We're on safe ground. Amazing. What a great story. Right then. Well, let's get stuck into your first launchpad. So this one, and I don't know, I didn't check when we talked about this, but whether or not you have watched or are a fan of Game of Thrones.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, this is typically how these launchpads get created. Is that I'll be watching something or listening to something, and some phrase will jump into my head, and then I'll make a really tenuous link to leadership, and then seek out evidence to support my tenuous link, and then
love it.
That. This one's called, and if you are into Game of Thrones, it might be familiar. It's quite obscure, but there's a scene, and I don't know Game of Thrones well enough to be able to locate it, but there's a scene in a pub, or one of these kind of where
tavern.
Yeah, a tavern. That's it. Yeah, in a tavern, and they're eating something, and then basically they're waxing lyrical about it, and the guy says, "Yeah, it's all about the gravy. Don't give up on the gravy." And he's sort of suggesting that a lot of time people lose steam or they forget about the most important part. And it got me thinking about how leaders have to ensure that they kind of manage their own resources in terms of energy and time, as well as organizational resources, to make sure that projects don't kind of falter in those last moments. And so I started kicking around this idea that it's one thing to have this incredible idea. Ideas are great, but execution is kind of what makes or breaks a good idea. And although, these ideas can spark excitement and potential, it's the act of kind of turning them into reality that determines the success. So I started playing around with this idea that kind of the final stages of execution are often the graveyard of good intentions. And sadly, a lot of the launch pads echo mistakes I've made as a leader. It's kind of where it resonates so much. And I think I have been guilty of and continue to have to fight against losing interest in projects. Certainly, if we were going to use the kind of EEF's implementation cycle, the sustain bit, boring, not interested. I want the delivery. I want the explore. And so I started kind of kicking that around, and things I thought about were naturally fatigue. People just get tired. It's hard getting new things up and running, and it takes probably an extra level of effort above what you're already giving to really make a transformational difference. You then got that idea of kind of complacency. I think that idea that people see a little bit of success early on, and then they feel like they've made it, or they feel like, oh my God, this is going really, really well. I think we've cracked it. And often then that means that they kind of pull back or let their foot off the gas, so to speak. And then the last one, or last two I was thinking about, were naturally, you may have made some errors in resourcing at the beginning, which means that you generally either run out of time or money. And that means that the last bit is kind of flawed. And then this sort of law of diminishing returns I've thought about linked in that a lot of time, if you don't pay attention, you have to put an extraordinary amount of effort in at the end, which doesn't seem to have that much of an improvement. And so then you think, oh, is it worth it? You kind of want an easier life. But that was what was resonating with me. Why does it link to anything you're doing?
I think so. I mean, I think so much of it does. And if I'm going to be brutally honest, Chris, what you said really resonates for me. As I said right at the start, and today's not the day for me to tell the whole story, but the school I was privileged enough to lead through in that 7 years was remarkable, and we did some pretty cutting edge stuff.
Right.
So, some of it now, I who knows if we would still ironically have been able to do it. But when I look back on that 7 years, I think there were definitely moments where I was guilty of exactly what you're talking about, and particularly the thing about sustainability, right? Because I think by nature, I'm a very creative person, and my heart beats fast when I solve a problem. That to me is like, when I used to get up in the morning as a head, and I was a bit perverse this way, if my week had gone really smoothly and quietly, I'd come home miserable bugger on a Friday night. Because what made my heart beat faster was solving problems, dealing with challenge. And I think the reason I'd fallen in love with this school in the first place was there was so much challenge, and it was just so. And so I was always that guy who would go, come on, let's galvanize and empower people. Problem, let's find. And then I'd move on to the next challenge and the next problem. And when I look back on it in hindsight, there were definitely moments as an individual on a selfish level where I left people in my wake, assuming some of that's because I'd done it and we got it sorted, or I'd put people in place. And I think what this screams to me when I look back on it now, because you as a learner, as we're all learners, you try and unpick and go, okay, so what would I do differently now? What have I learned from that? Because making mistakes not the problem, learning from it would be the problem, right?
Yeah.
And I think a number of things. I think the first is that as a leader, the instinct for whatever reason, and I think we feel it profoundly across every field, but I think we feel it particularly profoundly as educators, because we constantly feel we have to justify the role we have, the title we've got in our job, the extra money we earn above some of our colleagues, whatever the reason might be. I've just got to prove to people how much I care. Therefore, if a challenge comes my way or it's a project I'm leading, it's my responsibility, and I'm not going to burden others with it, right? Because they're busy enough, and it's my job, it's what I'm paid for. And I think one of the things we have to be better at, first of all, is being really explicit about our own strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So I had an assistant head who, now in hindsight, I realise mopped up my mess, right? He'd been there for 30-something years and was never going to be the catalyst to transform the school the way it needed to be transformed. Because what he was brilliant at sustaining stuff and making the detail work and being really picky about making sure things were structured and embedded, right? And so we became a formidable partnership. And as I grew into the confidence of my role in that school, I realized my strengths were his weaknesses and his weaknesses were my strengths, right? And vice versa. And I think one of the things we've got to be able to understand is it takes more than one person to A, make the gravy, B, pour the gravy, and C, make sure there's enough gravy on the plate, right? Exactly. And I think that what's the danger is we think it's all about us, and it has to be all about us, and we have to drive the whole process. Yeah. What you realize, I think, when you you think of it as project management, is okay. So I am the catalyst. That's my role. That's what I do, right? I catalyze the environment. I catalyze the conditions. I catalyze the people, find the right people for the right moment to ignite the idea, to get it going, to build the process. But I am not necessarily the right person to sustain it, and that's okay. But then it's the art form is having the confidence to A, admit that, and B, find the people that can do that next bit. So it's building a leadership narrative that isn't always about you as the focus of the story.
Yeah.
And I think if you can do that in so many ways, first of all, you have energizers who keep you going when it hits the fan or when something goes wrong, who remind you of the vision, the values, why you're doing it, why the idea was created in the first place.
Yeah.
Then you have those people that kick you because they go, no, that we've got to spend a bit more time on that, mate. That isn't, it's not right yet, or it's not working yet. And that goes down to the economics. For me, what's really interesting about the law of diminishing returns and the resource that goes with that is again, it's about having those people that step in at that point and go, okay, Rich, I mean, there's a brilliant thing, and Ellis Genge is the role model here, right? You think about rugby and rugby union in particular, and a phrase that I think's developed over the last 15 or so years, that I think was first created by Eddie Jones when he was head coach of England, or maybe even Australia before that. And he came up with the concept that the people on the bench weren't substitutes, they were finishers, right?
Yeah, nice.
So they had a very specific role.
Yeah.
And not only did it make those people feel they were of value despite the fact they weren't in the starting 15, more importantly, there was a realization that when this group of people run out of steam, because what I want from them is 60 minutes of absolute pedal to the metal, burn yourself to the ground, because then we've got the finishers, right?
Yeah.
And their job is different. And I think to an extent, maybe we should think about leadership that way, that actually we need to remember we have the starters and we have the finishers, and they may not be the same person. And if you're beginning to run out of steam, it's okay to bring somebody on from the finishers bench to go, right, tag, this is your point at which we take that over. So I think for me, that spirit of collaboration and the confidence and courage as a leader to develop that before it's too late, because often we don't bring the finishers in until actually we've lost the ball.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. It's too late. So it's that awareness, it's having people that can help you audit your own performance and where you are on the energy scale and where your limit of your ability and talent in that project comes in, and then having the courage to make sure we've got the right people to finish it.
Love it. I'm going to have to put your name on this next book. There's so many launch pads coming out of this damn conversation. Brilliant. All right. Well, let's move on to your next Fast Friends question. And this is about what you value most in a friendship. Tell us about that.
Honesty. Yeah. And I'll give it again a very... I mentioned him before. So I was very lucky to meet Sir Ken Robinson before he became what I describe as Ted Ken. So he'd written all our futures. He'd devoted 40 years of his career to education, research, development in the UK, had then gone to become Director of Education at the Getty in California, and was then invited to do his TED speech, which changed his life. People, sadly, in many ways, stop at the 18 minutes of his TED speech, and educators, he's become Marmite. It wasn't his fault, but he's become Marmite, a polarizing figure in some people's eyes. Shouldn't be, because all that research and life experience, extraordinary portfolio and career. But I was very lucky to meet him before that, because otherwise he would never have had the time to become my friend, my professional father. And I remember when he was the person that encouraged me to write my first book, because once I thought it was right to leave the school, he said, you need to write down your experiences while they're fresh, so they don't become a kind of fantasy version of, they're real, right? And your philosophy and what you did and how you did it. And he said, then I think we ought to find you a publisher. And if we find you a publisher, in order to help you get a deal, because I was a nobody primary school head teacher, he said, I will write the foreword for your book, right? Okay. Which was like, by now he was phenomenon Ken, right? So this was like a huge endorsement. Anyway, I wrote what I thought was a really good book, and I sent it to him via email. I said, "Oh, can you take a look over? Any ideas, let me know." And I didn't hear anything for about 3 weeks. And then I got an email back from him saying, "Call me."
Right.
So I did. I thought, oh God. And he said, "Look, I'm going to be brutally honest with you, Richard. In its current form, this isn't good enough." Now, I hadn't written a book before in my defense.
No.
He said, "This isn't good enough." He said, the basics are fantastic, but it isn't good enough. And in its current form, I'm afraid I cannot write the foreword because I can't endorse it.
Wow.
Then he said, but
But
it could be fantastic. And if you're prepared to open yourself to me helping and mentoring you and helping you finesse this a bit,
yeah.
it could be a fabulous book. And I remember coming off the phone and my ego went into overdrive going, what the hell does he know? Idiot. Why, who does he think he is? All this stuff. Then, of course, I calmed down and I thought, oh, he's right. And, of course, I called him back. He spent so long with me helping me craft it into what became, I hope, a good book.
Yeah.
And so on so many levels, that to me is the best example I can give, because friendship for me isn't just, no, we love you, you're brilliant, that's fab. Yeah. Oh, well done, no, great, yeah.
Yeah.
Real friendship is knowing you can trust somebody to be honest with you. And I think that is why honesty to me is such a powerful trait of friendship, because the rest wraps around it.
Of course it does, yeah. And I think those two things kind of link together, don't they? I mean, the previous example about kind of, the rugby one, that idea that as leaders we need to be confident enough to admit our weaknesses, so to speak, and then proactively build a team around us, but also being quite explicit with people about what their role is and giving them license and permission to sit into that role and not to feel like, it's almost like, where are the boundaries, where are the lanes, that sort of thing. And then that other one about seeking out people who will challenge you, because, as you said, it's in that challenge, it's in that messiness that all the good stuff comes from. It's fascinating.
I mean, sorry to interject, and I think it's particularly pertinent, or it has been in education over the last 20 or so years, because there have been divisive figures on all sides of the education debate who have caused us to fracture to the point where we won't sit down any longer. And I think it's interesting, because I think it almost began in populism and polarization almost started in this country in education, right? And some of the characters involved in what we've seen on a larger political scale have then, unsurprisingly, been involved in some of that. And I think for me, the great tragedy when I look at the last 20 years is that whether you come from one side of the thinking or another, whether you're this behavior guru or that behavior guru, whether you're cog-sci or you're not cog-sci, right? The point is 99% of those people are passionate about the same thing, right? Kids, and doing the best for kids. And actually, rather than spending all our energy talking about why you're wrong and I'm right, should we not actually have the courage to go, maybe you're onto something there? And what I'd like to do is spend time with you so you can try and convince me. Exactly. And let's have a proper debate and professional dialogue and discussion. I think one of the challenges, I think, for us as an education professional, and particularly for the leaders in our education sector, is to not allow ourselves to continue to be polarized.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I've been making myself laugh recently where the office that we've got is where they train all the trainee teachers. And so regularly, at lunchtime and break time and things like that, people will ask me my opinion, because I lead teaching and learning across the trust. So they've got this false idea that I'm the best teacher, which I try to knock out of them. But I've now become really, they wouldn't say this, but I think I'm quite a boring conversationalist now, because they'll say things like, "Oh, Chris, what do you think? Or?" And I go, "Well, it depends." Yeah. And then that's almost my answer to everything now. Well, it depends. But oh, right.
But that's exactly as it should be, right? And then it's talking it through. And, one of the things that I I fight really hard for at the moment is that we've got to resurrect nuance. Because I think one of the things we're struggling for in society, and I think to an extent within the education debate over the last couple of decades, is I think we've seen the death of nuance. And I think
Right.
we've got to bring it back. And
Yeah.
again, as leaders, a word we keep talking about today, courage. One of the great courageous acts of a leader is to actually go, maybe you're right and I'm wrong. And
Yeah.
actually, maybe it's more nuanced than that. And maybe we need to learn and go, okay, let's just reframe this a little bit rather than digging your ground because either you feel I'm paid to I can't be wrong. I've got to be the person, I've got to be right, got to be in control.
Yeah.
Because and one of the things I used to say to trainee teachers when I was involved in teacher training many years ago was be fallible with your students. Because the thing is, and I think it's true of all kids, but particularly kids in areas of social challenge, if you as a teacher are the sage on the stage who appears to be all-knowing, in complete control emotionally and academically, and all things in between, your students cannot relate to you. No. They cannot relate to you. Yeah. And I think we have to be fallible. If we screw up, we should laugh about it, admit it to the kids and go, I made a mistake there, didn't I? But it doesn't matter, let's learn from it. Perfect role modeling. And I think we should be doing the same thing as leaders. We need to be honest enough to admit we're fallible.
Definitely. And I mean, Brene Brown would love that. That's right up her street. All right.
I'm going to use that as my kickoff line.
Do it. You'll be straight in there.
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm fallible.
And here's a marble for your jar. Boom. You're in. All right. Well, this next one, I'd said before that I purposefully, I had to try hard not to Google this person's name. I'm thinking, oh my God, it's rare that people put down a single individual as an ignition point for their life. So I'm desperate to hear about this guy. So you said that meeting Barry Barish, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
The ignition point. Who is Barry Barish?
Right. So Barry Barish, and by the way, if we've got any educators on here who are physics teachers or were physics teachers, right? I expect them to know the answer to this question.
Okay.
In fact, at this point, Chris, I want you to, when this goes out, I want you to pause the podcast and go, right, at this point, I invite you to email me with who you think, because any physics teacher that doesn't know, frankly, should be ashamed of themselves, right? So Barry Barish was the 2017 Nobel Prize winner for physics for his research. And I'm going to say this, having had an arts background, but, I've made a living out of looking like I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So he got his Nobel Prize for his research into gravitational waves.
Right.
Now, the physics teachers out there go, oh, yeah, brilliant. Okay, not a clue, me. But I got the chance, and one of those things you think he's impacted my life because he made me understand before I met him. And then as a result, he's crystallized and made explicit how I feel since I met him. Right. And I asked him a question. I got the chance to meet him in 2018. And I said to him, what were you looking for? How on earth do you put together a team of people that go on to win a Nobel Prize? Right? And he said, well, you advertise for research scientists in the places you would advertise for research scientists. Yeah. He said we were very lucky. We had over 3,500 serious applicants.
Wow.
I know. I said, what do you mean? Can you qualify for that? What do you mean by serious applicant? Qualify it for me. He said, these were people, Richard, and I know, Chris, you've got one you earned, a doctorate, right? Yeah. I've got one. It was an honorary one, and I found that hard enough. I didn't do anything for it. But he said these were people who had at least 2 doctorates to their name. Oh, my
goodness.
Right? I mean, wow. Yeah. He said, so these were 3,500 of the world's most respected research scientists in the area we were covering.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow. I said, how many places did you have funding for? He said, our funding, we were incredibly lucky. We were funded by Caltech.
Right.
We had enough funding for 138 researchers. I'm like, full and part-time, wow. I said, how did you sift 3,500 double doctorates down to, how do you do that? He said, well, actually, pardon me, the qualifications by then were almost irrelevant.
Right, of course,
He said, what we needed was something different. He said, and he described it, again, I'll tell the story as quickly as I can. he said basically we were looking for three-dimensional people. He said because in research science, one of the problems is the higher up the system you go, the more narrow your focus becomes. Right. So he said it's no one's fault. Their passion, their knowledge, their expertise is top of the world. But when you put people in a room, and what you're trying to do in research science is challenge a paradigm to create a new paradigm, right? He said you put people in a room who have all had the same experience,
Yeah.
right? It's very difficult to be innovative and to challenge anything because the locus for your experience is so narrow.
Yeah.
So he said it's a bit like you put those people in a room and it's a bit like they breathe increasingly stale air. He said, so what we needed were three-dimensional people. And I think this is really relevant in education too, right? So he said, I was looking for people when we were sifting through their applications who just fascinated me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people who, if I was going to interview them, were going to tell me about their passion for travel or sports or the arts or cooking or whatever else it might be, right? Yeah. Or music. I wanted people to just, he said, because what we needed was this, and he used that term, three-dimensional people. He said, because when you're looking to evolve, innovate, challenge a paradigm, what you actually need, and the next thing he said is the bit, right? It's the bit that I've just tried to play with. It blew my mind in its simplicity, its poetic beauty. He said, what we needed were people who had the courage to challenge the beauty of the proof.
Right.
Now, the reason that fires me and has had such an impact on me is because it helped me, I think, make sense explicitly of some of what had been implicit in my thinking as an educator throughout my career, and then latterly as a leader, which was, to an extent, education is quite a conformist exercise.
Yeah.
And that's true of the way we educate children and the way we are led and legislated to as a profession. It's quite a conformist exercise. Right or wrong, our job is to prepare kids to take tests and exams in quite narrow syllabus, in quite narrow ways. And what we're not doing is training people to challenge the beauty of the proof.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to, because in a world that is no longer the industrial age, where actually our job was to prepare people, filter them through whatever their correct vocation or academic slant was, push them into a career, whether it was working on a factory production line, whether it was working in a legal department or anywhere in between, right? The point was you filter them through, you put them into a field where they just become super efficient at what they have to do. And then their reward is certainty. So their reward is job for life, pension, home, maybe a holiday, car if they're lucky, family, all that stuff. None of that exists really in that form anymore. And, one of the things, I'm writing a new book at the moment, which is all about curiosity, because it was fired by this jump-off point from Barry Barish's comment. Right. And my point societally at the moment is, my challenge is, given all of the manipulation, social media, digital technology, political, whatever else it is, are we creating generations of people that are prepared to challenge the beauty of what is sold to them as the proof?
That's a good challenge.
And I think if I had a wish list for the future of education, I would put that at the absolute top of my vision and values statement. That if I was ahead now, my vision statement would be, at our school, we get our young people to challenge the beauty of the proof.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, because this is not the first, it's probably the 20th conversation that I've had about the need for leaders to be open to different perspectives, but also for people who work in teams to feel comfortable challenging, speaking truth to power and all that sort of stuff. And what's just struck me then is there's no real reason why we're not encouraging that at a much, much, much earlier stage and systematically encouraging it. But then I started thinking even more than that. It shouldn't be a lazy, we want you to challenge. We should teach them how to challenge,
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes when my own kids ask me for something and I say no, I almost say no because they brought a really weak argument.
Yeah.
I almost want to say, go away, do some research, do some more thinking, and come back with a better argument than you want it. Do you know? Like, manipulate me, please.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think, maybe it was a generational thing. I remember back to when we were kids, if we used to say to our parents, oh, can I watch such and such or stay up till 9 o'clock? We wouldn't just go with that, would we? We'd go with the reason why we should be allowed to watch that particular program or stay up that little bit later or whatever else it might be. Oh, let me stay up and watch the James Bond film, Mum. No, but Mum, the intrinsic value of learning how to solve problems and understand good and evil and all those things would be such a great learning point for me that extra hour is going to be more valuable than Okay, but you're right, and I think it's interesting because the challenge I would lay is, I think we're born with it. When you think about your kids, my kids, the kids I was fortunate enough to work with in early years at the schools I worked in, they'd always ask why. They'd always challenge, right? And I'm not saying it. What I don't want is the polar instinct at this point to go, so what you're advocating is anarchy. No, that's not what I'm advocating at all. What I'm advocating is people who have the courage to go, yeah, but why? And have you thought about? And what about? And maybe this is the right answer. It goes back to a thread we've kind of talked about through this whole podcast. But I love that idea that we are going to raise generations who have the confidence and, as you say, the skill to challenge the beauty of the proof.
Yeah, well, that's a great phrase. Wow. So we're going to finish off briefly looking at the next sort of launch pad. And this one is kind of, it came to me because I'm not great at this. This idea that like behind most people's actions, there's a whole complex web of things that come before. And I was really drawn to this kind of stimulus response thing, kind of who's the guy from the concentration camp? I don't remember his name. Who wrote the book?
Oh, I know who you mean. Yeah. It'll come to me.
It will. Yeah. This idea that there is a space between Viktor Frankl.
That's it.
That's the guy. Yeah. Between something happening to us and us responding is a space, and for most of us, myself very much included, it's almost infinitesimal between my son annoying me and me responding in a very animalistic, reptilian kind of type 1 response. And actually, if we widen that gap, if we put more space between stimulus and response, we can usually understand situations a bit better and then respond better. So I started playing around with that, and what would it be that might sit in between stimulus response? And the first one being, our perception is our truth, our perception is our reality, and yet our perceptions are different. And so inquiring into people's perceptions might give you a link to why they're responding in a certain way. Their own beliefs might have an impact, their current level of emotions and their kind of state, if they're, state anxiety, that sort of thing. This is a big one for me, this past experience that, we are products, aren't we, of our experiences, and our beliefs and our understanding and all those things are, because of that. And so looking into why that happened might be a big thing. Self-esteem, I think a lot of us are motivated by kind of defending ourselves at all costs. There's something about confidence. There's probably something about context as well. And then the last one I started thinking about was just people's ability to self-regulate. And I can't believe I've reached a ripe age of 47 and I can't actually regulate myself particularly well. And we won't do it now because this is a kid's show, but I've actually got this stimulus and response tattoo on my chest. It was a midlife crisis, and I was like, what else can I get stuck on myself? Oh, I'll do
Love
that.
It.
Sadly, it hasn't helped at all because I have to walk around topless to be able to see it. So I might have to get it redone somewhere on my forehead or something like that. But yeah, does this resonate with you? This idea between gap between stimulus and response?
Yeah, it really does on so many levels. And in some ways, I think and you're really good at this, Chris, because I think you're kind of wrapping almost everything we've talked about in our episode that you've invited me on to today. Because I think if you think about the way most of us are living our lives right now, and I think, the interesting thing is, we tend to be better at self-regulation when we're in a good place and a good space, right? Because you use the example, my child really did something that annoyed me and bang, it's like reptilian. It's like in a classroom, isn't it? We talk about the ability as a teacher to always be professional. And if a child misbehaves, don't take it personally, deal with it objectively. Now, in theory, that sounds great, right? Reality, when you're in the maelstrom of a lesson that's going pear-shaped because a couple of kids are really cracking off, it is not easy to not take it personally. And as a profession, we're not very good at it because actually we care so much. Everything feels personal, right? Good, bad, and indifferent. And I think that for me, the realization is it's really easy to be self-regulating when things are going well. We tend to be able to do it. If you pre-prepare a conversation, you visualize maybe a hard conversation you're going to have, you play it through the scenarios, you're then able to be more strategic, more like a chess player, more objective. And I think that is the key to this, that ability to be objective. Because I think we live in a world, sadly, not just in education, but I think it's amplified in education, where there is an enforced urgency, right? Where we've got to do it now. It's got to be done. Got to get it done yesterday. So, for example, when you're trying to carry out quite a large change in a school, our instinct is, okay, we'll have a meeting, we'll train everybody, and then by Monday, everyone's going to do it.
Yeah, right? Well
done. And we need to be more objective about it. We need to be more capable of then unpicking the steps and going, okay, let's not seek 100% consensus. Let's be strategic. Let's find people that we can find who can start this, light the flame, become ambassadorial, then build, contagion. And so we build the model. And I think the same thing is true in the intensity of the moment of what we do. And I think the art form is to realize, I don't think we can just be really good at, can't be a ninja at this stuff.
No.
The biggest ability to self-reflect is to know when you're going to find yourself in a situation or anticipate duress.
Yeah.
Because if you can anticipate duress, immediately you're able to self-regulate more.
Yeah.
The problem often is when we walk blindly into a challenge that hits us hard, right?
That's
if you take, for example, the whole lived experience of COVID, when it first happened, we all went blank.
Yeah.
Like almost the global consciousness was one of, right? It was the reptilian brain just shutting down, right?
Yeah.
And actually, what we realize in some ways is after that first phase, really skilled educators and skilled educational leaders. And by the way, the admiration I have, because I was out the game by then.
Yeah.
And when I look at my wife, who led a school through that, my daughter was teaching through that, and all of you that lived through that in schools, actually what we saw was an evolution of the ability to deal with complex personal environmental factors. And actually, as a profession, you became increasingly strategic, right? And you went from being reflexive and being reactive to being proactive.
Yeah,
and in some ways, I think that is the leadership challenge, because in all of our lived experiences, the world is turning so fast now. And I don't just see this in education, I see it across all walks of life. We are, most of us, exhausted and burnt out and really suffering under the mental duress of all of this, because we are spending our lives reacting to stuff. And reacting is exhausting. It's exhausting. Physically and mentally. It's a bit like trying to catch Usain Bolt, and he kind of slows down for a bit and you think you're nearly there, and then he speeds up and he's gone again, right? and it's exhausting. And I think actually what we need to do is try and swing the pendulum slightly so that we find space and time to be more proactive. And that is where the self-regulation comes in, because the world ain't going to slow down.
No.
The rate of change and uncertainty isn't going to slow down. So we have to change the way we do this. And it's why I think your model is so powerful, because it doesn't have to be about, oh, I'll do step 1 now, step 2, step 3. No. It's about self-awareness. And also it goes back to one of the other themes we were talking about in this episode, which is mentorship.
Yeah.
Because if we have a mentor, and that doesn't have to be hierarchically somebody in a higher position than us, that doesn't be the case at all. No. But it needs to be somebody we know we can trust. Goes back to the issue about friendship. Yeah. Who we can trust, who will be honest with us, who will say, Chris, just talk me through what you're thinking of doing.
Exactly.
Now let's step back, explain why. Now explain, I remember when I was first being mentored to go for my first interview as a school leader. And I think it was actually for my headship. And remember, the in-tray exercise you get and they said, make sure you phase your response in 3 ways.
Right.
And the first response is, what do I need to do about that immediately? So if, for example, if it's a child safety issue, what is my immediate response?
Yeah.
Then what is my medium response?
Okay.
And then what is the long-term strategic plan?
Oh, I like that.
And I think that actually that is a really simple way then of starting to train ourselves into this process and to have a mentor that helps us ask those questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we need to do about this today, now, in the moment? What do we, child protection issue, right? What do we need to do now?
Yeah.
What do we need to do in the midterm? And what do we need to do strategically?
I love it.
And for me, in many ways, that is just a model of learning, right? Yeah. That is a model of learning. But it's, I think, a really nice way of teaching ourselves to self-regulate.
Yeah, that sounds really sensible. And it gives you that ability to engage both sides, doesn't it? That you're not negating your instinct, but you're also recognizing the need for further thinking and deeper exploration, probably with more people.
Go back to your example, right? Your child, right? Your child does something that really angers you, right? Yeah. Step 1 is, okay, I need to deal with that in the short term. No, stop.
Yeah.
That ain't happening, right? Then you start reflecting, right? You go, okay, so what do I need to make sure that if the next time this happens, how do I deal with it? And actually, the long-term strategic plan is, what do we need to put in place in terms of understanding, learning, development, family rules, values, that means they understand that it won't happen again in the long term.
Exactly. Or build an annex and just let them live in there.
Put bars on their bedroom.
Regulation.
And open it when they're 21.
Right then. So we have reached the end of the podcast and we've got a singular question to go. And the last question, we joked about this before, and I don't know if you are going to talk about this, but the last question that Richard chose was, when was the last time he cried in front of someone? And if we flipped the story and he said that to me, I would say about an hour ago, before we came on, when you told me a story that made me cry. So I've already cried today because of Richard. But when was the last time you cried?
It was when I told you the story I was going.
Oh, we're both crying at the same time.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the first thing is to say, proud dad moment. My daughter got married in the summer just before we recorded this, right? So only a couple of months ago. And I mean, I was a mess through the whole day. It's so funny. My memory of the day already, I think I said to you, was it all felt like it was all soft focus. And then when I reflected on it the next day, I realized the reason it felt like it was soft focus was because I saw the whole day through tears, right? I cried from the minute I first saw my daughter and her bridesmaids getting ready in the morning to watching my daughter and her by then husband do their first dance at the end of the day, and cried in between. And the moment which really set me off, which was the one I shared with you, was I lost my mum, so my daughter's grandmother, in January, and my daughter got married in July. So it's quite a short space of time between those two things. And of course, My mum was going to be at the wedding. She'd had her invitation. My daughter had started to draft the table plan and where she was going to sit and all this kind of stuff. And sadly, we lost her in January. And my daughter asked her best friend to be her maid of honor. And we've known Louise, the woman that was invited by my daughter, for a while. And she's always been a lovely person. But this made us realize how special she was, because without my daughter knowing, she went to my daughter's now husband, my son-in-law, and asked for a photograph, her favorite photograph of her grandma, my mum, pardon me. And she went and bought a silver locket, and she put a copy of the photograph in the silver locket, put the silver locket, attached it to my daughter's bouquet, and then passed it to my daughter when she was getting ready to walk down the aisle. And on a number of levels, you can understand why that made me cry, because first of all, my mum led my daughter down the aisle. And that was when it really set me off. And also the sheer emotional intelligence and love that Louise had shown my daughter, and care in that moment of just doing that behind the scenes.
Amazing.
And giving her and preparing, going to the hard work and knowing how important that would be to her. And I suppose, so crying in public is not for me unusual. I do it all the time. Even when recently I was sat on a plane on my own coming back from a work trip, and I was watching a comedy, right? And I was bawling my eyes out to such an extent that a member of aircrew actually came up to me and checked in and went, "Are you all right, sir?" So I cry at the drop of a hat. And I thank, we were talking earlier about people we thank. I thank my stepdad for that, because my stepdad, and this is a kind of very old-fashioned thing to say, was a real man's man. Right. He was a big guy, precision engineer, did really kind of man things in that kind of old-fashioned sense, was a proper man's man. But he taught me it was okay to cry and be emotional in front of all kinds of people all the time. Yeah. And I think after a difficult childhood, he taught me that, and that profound sense of honesty, that ability to be emotional allows you to have that freeing thing. And so, I cried all day at my daughter's wedding. Unsurprisingly, my wife had anticipated. She bought an entire box of Kleenex just for me. And she put a label on it that said "Father of the Bride." And by the end of the day, there was no tissues left. But that was a very special moment.
Well, that in itself is a great message to leaders about being a role model, about making things okay. When leaders are vulnerable, you open the door for other people to be vulnerable, and so on and so on. So tell us a bit about how people can connect with you, your work, that sort of thing.
So the easiest way, I suppose, is through my website, which is richardgerver.com. I'm on all the socials and stuff. Luckily for me, I have a name that no one else in the world seems to have in Richard Gerver. So if you just Google Richard Gerver, you'll find me, or through the socials and stuff. And please do, because one of the things that's really important to me is if somebody takes the time and effort to connect with me, I promise I'll connect back.
Nice. Well, that's brilliant. Well, thanks to everyone for listening. If you're interested in any of the Leadership Launchpad stuff, then do get in contact with me or visit the website. And we'll see you at the next one.